Hello everyone, welcome to OK Biology Classroom and welcome to our topic cells. Today we are going to look at another subtopic under the main topic cells, which is the nucleic acids. And for nucleic acids, it means we are going to look at DNA and we are going to look at RNA. But this particular lesson is going to take care of the DNA. Okay, but before we get into what we have for today, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you have our videos whenever they are released. Alright, so nucleic acids, and as I said, today we're going to look at the structure of DNA. So we're going to link the nucleus to the chromosome and as well link the chromosome to the DNA. So we say that at the end of this lesson, the students would be able to distinguish between chromosome and DNA, and students should be able to describe the structure of DNA as well as identify the building block of DNA. Okay. So now let's get into what we have. Alright. So we see that there are some rod-like structures or thread-like structures in the nucleus of cells, and these rod-like or thread-like structures are called chromosomes. So it means that in every cell, a normal eukaryotic cell, so to say, so when you pick the cell of maybe a human being, and you study the nucleus of that particular cell, you should find some structures in there that are rod-like or they are thread-like, however I would want to describe them. And these structures are called chromosomes. Okay, and let's look at the images that we have here to enhance our understanding. So this is showing a cell. So let's take this as a cell of a human being, or a eukaryotic cell, so to say. And we find out that there is a central part of it, and here it is so dark. This is the nucleus. Now when you open up the structure of the nucleus and study the structures within, we are going to find these things in there. These are the chromosomes we are talking about. So these are the rod-like structures or the thread-like structures that we are calling chromosomes here. Okay, so we see that this one looks paired. There are two different chromosomes. So this is one chromosome, and this is another chromosome. And the two chromosomes have been paired at the middle here. And as well, when we study this one too, we see that there is another paired chromosome here, another paired chromosomes here, another paired chromosomes here. And there are so many of them. Okay, so when we try to look at them in their straightened form, this is what we are going to see. So for one of the pairs, we're going to see this structure and that structure. So this is one pair. Now when you pick the normal somatic cell of a human being, we are supposed to find 46 chromosomes. But since they are appearing in pairs, there will be 23 pairs. So this is one pair. This is another pair. This also is another pair. So we have so many pairs up to the 22nd pair. But remember that when we get to the 22nd pair, but I said we are supposed to have 46 chromosomes, but when we get to the 22nd pair, we have 44. So in humans, there is supposed to be a 23rd pair, either this pair or that pair. And this pair is for females, and this pair is for males normally. So when you add, assuming we are going to add the female pair to the 22 pairs we have here, so the addition of this female 23rd pair to this would give us the total 46 chromosomes that we're supposed to get, because there are going to be 23 pairs in all. Assuming we had to add this one, that is the male pair. Okay, so if we add this male pair to the 22 pairs, it means we are going to get the 23 pairs and 46 in all. Alright, so these are what we have. So let's note that point, that within the nucleus, there are some thread-like structures or rod-like structures that are called chromosomes. And when you pick the normal somatic cell of human being, you're going to find 46 chromosomes. But because they are appearing in pairs, they are 23 pairs. Right. So after knowing the structure of the chromosome, identifying that within the nucleus there are some structures that are called chromosomes in there. So how does the chromosome actually also look? Yes, The chromosome is made up mainly of a helical structure called DNA. And DNA meaning deoxyribonucleic acid. So that is what the name was coined from. The D coming from the deoxyribo, the N coming from the nucleic, and the A coming from the acid. So DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. So when you open up the structure of the chromosome, the main thing you're going to find in there is the DNA. And we have an image here to help you to better understand what we are describing in here. So this is a chromosome. So this is an example of what we saw on the previous page. Yes. There are two chromosomes in here, but we're going to consider the chromosome on the right hand side. So that is our second chromosome. That is what we are going to consider. So it means this chromosome starts from the base here up to this region. Alright. So we are going to open up the chromosome at this end to look at what we are going to find in there. Now when we open it up, we are going to see a structure like this. So a coiled structure would now emerge. But what is the main thing in it? Further opening of it would reveal this particular structure. Now of this whole structure, what we need to focus on is this region. Because here we see that it has been well expanded for us to see what we find in there. And we see that there is a helical structure as we see it. This is the helical structure we are talking about. So this is the DNA. It is a very, very long molecule. So for now, let us note that the main component of the chromosome is DNA, and the DNA is helical in appearance. So that is what I'm showing with the cursor here. It is helical. Okay. So nucleus contains chromosomes. The chromosome contains DNA. Let us note that point and move on from there. But when you pick the chromosome, it is not only made up of the DNA molecule, but it also has another protein with it, which is the histone. So histones together with the DNA make up the chromosome. But our focus is on the DNA, and which is the main component of the chromosome. Alright, so we are going to further expatiate on the DNA. Right. So now I'm showing only the helical part that we saw on the previous page. So there's the helical structure, and this is only a portion of it. It's supposed to be longer than this. DNA molecule actually is very long, but this is showing only part of it so that we can easily understand what we are talking about. Okay, this structure of DNA was described by two scientists, Watson and Crick. They described the DNA as a double helix, and we can understand their definition from here, or the description of the structure from here. We see that this is one part of the DNA molecule, and we call this a strand. So this is one strand of the DNA molecule. Okay, and this one is another strand of the DNA molecule. So there's another strand. So meaning that there are two different strands, this one and that one. Two different strands that make up the DNA molecule. And remember that they have been twisted about each other. So as you see it, they have been twisted about each other. And that is what gives them the helical shape. So Watson and Crick simply describe them as the double helix, because of the way they have been twisted about each other and their look. Okay. Then it is made up of two strands, as I have talked about. Remember that these two strands are also connected at their bases. This image also shows that clearly. Now we see here that there is a base. This is the back of the DNA molecule. So on one side, this is the back of it. On the other side is the back of it. But within, we find that they have been connected in here. So you see this green connecting to the red part here. And this is one base, that is another base. So these two bases have connected the two strands. So that is why it is being referred to as a base pair here. Okay. So the point that we are noting here, secondly, is that apart from the fact that the DNA is a double helix, it is made up of two strands that are connected at their bases. And they are connected by hydrogen bonds. Okay. So in further looking at the structure of the DNA, we have now come to understand that the DNA molecule is made up of two strands. But what happens if we try to separate the two strands? They are always twisted about each other, so they form the double helix. But when we separate them, it further reveals that each DNA molecule, or each DNA strand, in this case as we are referring to it when they are separated, is a polynucleotide. And why do we refer to it as a polynucleotide? Remember that the name polynucleotide means many nucleotides. Many nucleotides, because the word poly means many. So it means each strand of the DNA is made up of many nucleotides, so polynucleotide. Okay, so just like we see in this particular case. So this is what we are trying to separate. So we pick one of them. So for example, if we try to separate this one from this one, it means we're going to have two separate strands. Now, in other words, we would refer to each strand also as a polynucleotide, because each strand is made up of many nucleotides. So once we have come to understand that each strand is a polynucleotide, it would mean that basically the building block of the polynucleotide, and for that matter the building block of the whole DNA, is the nucleotide, because many nucleotides are joined to form the polynucleotide, and having two polynucleotides would give you the full DNA. So that means we would have to also look at the structure of the nucleotide, and that would be essential in our discussion for today. So how is the nucleotide like? It has already been established that a nucleotide is the building block of DNA, and it's as well the building block of RNA. But here, because we're not looking at the RNA, we'll look at the RNA later. That is in our next lesson. Yes, but now we are focusing on the DNA, and we are saying that the nucleotide is the building block of DNA. So that is an important point for all of us to note. This is a journey. So remember where we started from and where we have got to. We looked at the nucleus as an important part of a cell, and within the nucleus we found some structures that are called chromosomes. Now, when we open up the structure of the chromosome, you are going to find a helical structure called the DNA. And since DNA is our focus, we are looking at the structure of the DNA. And further expatiating on the structure of DNA also reveals that it is made up of two strands, but these two strands have been twisted about each other, so they form a helical structure. And then we have also established that many nucleotides have been joined to form one strand. In other words, we can say that many nucleotides have been joined to form a polynucleotide. Okay, so since we know that the main building block of the DNA is the nucleotide, now it is essential for us to know what makes up the nucleotide. So let's get the understanding up to this stage. A nucleotide has three main parts. There is a phosphate group, there is a 5-carbon sugar or a pentose sugar, and then there is a nitrogenous base. A phosphate group, a 5-carbon sugar or pentose sugar, and a nitrogenous base. So these are the three parts of the nucleotide. So let's look at this image in here. Well, the image in here is revealing to us the various parts of the nucleotide. So when we come down here, we see that this particular side is showing clearly what a full nucleotide should look like. So a full nucleotide should have a phosphate group. It should have the sugar, which is the 5-carbon sugar, or you can also call it the pentose sugar. And then there is a nitrogenous base. And you see that the phosphate group is connected to the sugar is connected to the nitrogenous base. Okay, let's make this point also. It is important to note that the phosphate group and the pentose sugar, they form the backbone of the whole DNA molecule. So when we pick each strand of the DNA molecule, we get to realize that each strand is made up of the backbone, which is phosphate group, and then the pentose sugar. So for instance, let's start from the top here. This is a phosphate group, so there's the back of it. So from the top here to down here, this is one strand. just like we have another strand in here. So we have one strand on the left hand side, we have another strand on the right hand side. So we are picking the strand on the left hand side. You see that the phosphate group here has been connected to the sugar here, another phosphate group connected to the sugar here, another one connected to the sugar here. So at the back we only find phosphate group and sugar being connected one to the other. Phosphate group always connected to a 5-carbon sugar, and you can see clearly from here that they form the back of that strand. So this strand has this as the backbone. Okay, so when we move to the interior, then you find the nitrogenous bases. So this is one nitrogenous base, this is another nitrogenous base, this is one nitrogenous base, this another nitrogenous base. So we have so many of them. But before we move to the next page, I would like you to also note that you see we have different letters written within the various nitrogenous bases. This one has letter A in it, this one has letter T in it, this has letter G in it, this one has letter C in it. Okay, but I'll be talking about them when we move to the next page. But here, what I would like us to notice is that the nucleotide is the building block of the whole DNA molecule. So when you pick the nucleotide, you also come to understand that the nucleotide is made up of 3 main parts. That is the phosphate group, the 5-carbon sugar, also called the pentose sugar, and the nitrogenous base. And I have said that the phosphate group and the pentose sugar form the backbone of the DNA molecule. So we are going to look at the nitrogenous bases. As I said on the previous page, that the nitrogenous bases appear to be having different letters. So what caused it? Okay, there are 4 different forms of the nitrogenous bases in every DNA molecule. So what are they? 1, adenine. So there is one form of the nitrogenous bases that is called adenine, and we usually represent this adenine with the letter A. And then there is the guanine, which we represent with the letter G, and then there is the cytosine, which we represent with C, as well as thymine with T. Okay, note that always an adenine pairs with thymine, and then a guanine pairs with cytosine. So as we have 2 different strands, on one strand where the nitrogenous base is A, the other strand which has been connected, so those 2 bases that have been connected, we should have a T on the complementary strand. So let's look at it in this image. It shows clearly here. This is the nitrogenous base, the first of them that we see on the left hand side strand. Okay, so this one is an adenine, so it's A, and you can see that it is being connected to a T. And surely we have already learned that they are connected by hydrogen bonds. So the A here is being connected to a T here. So adenine always connected to a thymine, then guanine always connected to a cytosine, which has also been revealed here. So guanine has been connected to a cytosine. And as well, we come here again, we see T connected to A, and we see A connected to T here. We see C connected to G here. We see G connected to C here. Yes. So for my students, one thing that I use to help them to remember is using this phrase at Gold Coast, where the at means A is always connecting to T, Gold Coast means G is connecting to C. So once the student is able to remember this, the student is good to go. Okay, maybe in your case you can also form your own, whether acronym or a phrase or a sentence, something that will help you to remember, because this pairing is also very, very important. I mean, the pairing rule here is very, very important, so try and then always remember them. Okay, as an additional information for you, remember that the nitrogenous bases are of 2 different groups. Okay, we have one group called the purines, and purines are made up of the adenine and guanine. And then we have another group called the pyrimidines. The pyrimidines are made up of the cytosine and thymine. So let's note this point also in addition. Adenine and guanine make up the purines, cytosine and thymine make up the pyrimidines. Okay, So that is what we have for today's class. Today we have looked at the structure of DNA, and it's so interesting. Yes. So today we have established the relationship between the DNA and chromosome, which is what we did firstly. And then we also came to understand that when you pick a chromosome, the main structure that the chromosome is made up of is the DNA. And so we picked the DNA and we talked about the DNA, and that is actually our main objective for today's class. So we picked the DNA molecule and we tried to look at exactly what is found in there. And we came to understand that the DNA molecule is made up of two strands twisted about each other. So we tried to straighten them and separate them into two strands. Now, when you separate them into their separate strands, you get to understand that each strand is made up of many nucleotides. And since they are made up of many nucleotides, we can refer to each strand as a polynucleotide. So we have to pick the nucleotide and talk about the nucleotide. The nucleotide itself is made up of three parts. So we have the phosphate group, we have the pentose sugar, or also called the 5-carbon sugar, and then we have the nitrogenous base. So these come together to form the building block of DNA, the nucleotide. So these are what we have looked at. And we also came to realize that when you look at the nitrogenous base of the nucleotide, it comes in 4 different forms. So you have the adenine, you have the guanine, you have the cytosine, and you have the thymine. So these are the 4 forms of nitrogenous bases of a DNA molecule. So that is what we looked at. Okay. Since we have looked at DNA in this class, in our next class we are going to look at RNA. So we'll be looking at the structure of RNA as well. So we have some questions for you, which I believe you can easily answer them once you have been part of today's class. Now the first question says that, how did Watson and Crick describe the structure of DNA? And the second question says that, list the 4 forms of nitrogenous bases of DNA. And the third question states that, state the components of a nucleotide. And I believe these questions are very easy and you can answer them. And the fourth question says that, one strand of DNA shows the following bases: T, G, G, A, C, A, T, C, A, A, G, C, G, T, C, T, A, G. So what you're going to do is that, since this is the nitrogenous bases, or they are the nitrogenous bases on one strand, you are going to write the nitrogenous bases on the complementary strand. Okay, so if the nitrogenous base on one strand has these, what would be the nitrogenous bases on the other strand? So you write them correspondingly. Okay. When you answer these questions, I'll provide a WhatsApp number so that you can send your answers to, or an email address that you can forward your answers to. So whichever way that is good for you, you can send your answers to them. And we are also going to respond, yes. Okay, so this is the end of today's class. So I would like to continue to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, so that whenever we release our videos, you'll be notified and you can continue learning with us. Okay, thank you for watching. See you in our next class.